Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell from the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego, California. Each week, we provide spiritual leadership to our growing community, as well as bringing positive change into people's lives. If this message speaks to your heart, please consider helping to support our dedication by making a one-time or recurring donation now. Wealth with work. Gandhi said that wealth without work was one of the social ills of society that needed to be dealt with. And you know, unity is part of the New Thought movement, unity, science of mind. Some put Christian Science under that very broad umbrella as well. And New Thought, unity, really had its roots in the late 1800s. In what was called the mind cure movement. It kind of came out of transcendentalism. But not only did it come out of this mind cure movement, it also came out of a movement with a focus on prosperity. And there's a place for that, absolutely. But sometimes in our approach in unity and in metaphysics, when it comes to prosperity, I think we put the focus on one half of the equation. And we put the focus on the half of the equation that has to do with thinking and visualizing and affirming and praying and treasure mapping and putting our intention out there. And all of that is good. All of that is one side of the equation. But I think we forget the other part. And that is, yes, we're sitting on a gold mine, but we've got to get up off our affirmations. We can't just stay sitting on the gold mine. It's there. You know, Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, didn't refer to it as a gold mine, but referred to it as substance, that there's no lack of substance anywhere in the universe, and that substance responds to our call upon it, to our demand. I don't like that word, but he used that word, to our demand upon it. And that's where we use these teachings, these practices that we have in metaphysics of visualizing and affirming and intention setting. That's a way that we begin to pull upon that divine substance. But eventually we do have to get up and we do have to do something. There is engagement involved. There is work involved. There is some effort involved. And this is what I think in part Gandhi was pointing to when he said that one of the ills of society is wealth without work. And Eknath, in his book, The Compassionate Universe, writes about this idea and shares many examples in his chapter on this idea of wealth with work. He writes, to grow to our full height, we need to be challenged with tasks that draw out our deeper resources, the talents and capacities we didn't know we had. We need to be faced with obstacles that cannot be surmounted unless we summon up every last ounce of our daring and creativity. This kind of challenge is familiar to any great athlete or scientist or artist. Those I have spoken with all agree that no truly worthwhile accomplishment comes easily. So it is the work we do, he writes. It is the work we do, getting involved, getting our hands dirty, that draws out our magnificent talents and abilities more than we knew we had. It's our work that gives meaning to life, that satisfies our soul and lets our light shine out into the world. Work is not a bad four-letter word. It's actually a really good word. It's interesting that in this piece that I'm reading to you today from Eknath, that he uses the phrase, getting our hands dirty. The phrase dirt therapy has come up for me 3 times in this past week. Twice in a board meeting, and then once somewhere else, I can't remember. And I smile because, and forgive me because here's another gardening reference, I'm deep into my gardening, and I can't garden very well with gloves on. John has bought me all these really pretty garden gloves, with flowers on them and all pretty, and he's brought me practical ones. But I put my hands in them, and I can't feel enough. I want to feel the dirt. I'm a neat and clean person, but when it comes to my garden, I want to feel the dirt. I want to get in there and work it. I think Eknath is really onto something, and so was Gandhi. And not just the literal sense of physically getting our hands dirty, but the idea of meaningful work. Think about one of the challenges that many people are facing today as our population in the U.S. is aging, right? And we have more and more people entering retirement age or right in it. One of the biggest challenges of that is people really struggling with their sense of identity, their sense of, well, what now, right, Virginia? Virginia Berger is a life coach that works with people entering into retirement. On one hand, we can't wait to be our own boss, right, and have our own sense of freedom and control over our own time. But there's also a part of us, a significant part of us, that identifies with meaningful activity. That's probably a more palatable word than the word work for some. Meaningful activity, purpose. Eknath says that one of the challenges we are facing is we have become a society of consumers. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And we get so many messages, don't we, to keep consuming. I mean, we're bombarded with messages of this product and that product, and everywhere we're being invited to explore this thing or to explore that thing, buy this thing, buy that thing. Sometimes even our leaders say to us when we're really in a slump, get out there and consume, get out there and shop, as if shopping should be a pastime. Beneath it is this idea of consuming more and more and more, and we can be lured into the idea that our sense of satisfaction and happiness comes from the stuff that we get, the stuff that we accumulate. We need to look at it differently. We need to look at it differently. Eknath grew up in India. He eventually came to the U.S. On a Fulbright scholar. He was a professor at UC Berkeley. He was the first to teach a 4-credit class on meditation in the late 60s, a 4-credit class on meditation. But his writing and his life experiences, his shaping forces, really took place in his early years in India. And he writes about growing up with a different understanding of wealth. As I grew up with a different understanding of wealth, our village was prosperous. We lacked nothing, yet we had little of what most economists today call wealth. A rich topsoil nourished by centuries of village agriculture, 100 inches of rain a year, a dense forest and a plentiful coconut grove, a fresh, pure supply of water which we drank straight from our wells. These were free, and they form the material resources for our prosperity. The real foundation of our prosperity, though, was the deep and enduring sense of community that enabled us to make the best of those resources. On this foundation, a tradition of excellent craftsmanship had grown up. Generation after generation of potters and carpenters, blacksmiths, goldsmiths, and weavers learned their trade from their families. They took great pride in the beauty, utility, and enduring quality of their work. So we had all the things we needed, well-crafted, beautiful things that lasted a long time, but we didn't do much consuming. We didn't do much consuming. I think about this word, consuming. I think about the idea of consumption. Over the last at least 2 months, my mother and I and Jennifer have been spending time here in the church clearing out years' worth of clutter. The result of consuming and holding and not regularly letting go. I think of feng shui, and one of the first rules of feng shui is no clutter. No clutter, right? And I think about Thanksgiving. I think about one of the things that many of us experience at Thanksgiving time, and that is the overconsumption of food, right? How many of us, raise your hand, remember you're in church. Raise your hand if you have ever overconsumed food. We all have, right? And you know, the first few bites taste wonderful, whatever it is that you're thinking of when I say that. Maybe it's a dessert, maybe it's at Thanksgiving dinner. The first few bites taste wonderful and they begin to satisfy the need for food, because we have a need for food. But there's a point at which we cross over that line, right? Of enough, you're laughing with me, right? Of enough to too much. And how does it feel? It doesn't feel good, right? The beginning part of it is wonderful, it's delicious, but when we cross over that line of too much, it just doesn't feel good. We feel sluggish, our body hurts, right? The same can be said not just of food, but sometimes we do the same with stuff, physical stuff in our lives, or too many things we say yes to, and we squeeze out any room for a breathing space in our lives. And so all of this idea, I think, really points to the original word, or the original meaning of the word wealth, which was well-being. I don't remember when I first learned that. Maybe I just looked it up in the dictionary and looked at the root meaning of the word. But it comes from an Old English word, and the meaning of it is well-being. Think about that for a moment. Doesn't that feel quite different than the way maybe we usually think of wealth, right? When I think of wealth, at least superficially, I think of lots of big, beautiful, wonderful, expensive things. Anybody else get that picture? But when I reflect on wealth as well-being, then I get a completely different feeling. Then I get the spiritual integrity of the idea of wealth. I believe that we are meant to live in wealth, in well-being, that we are meant to have what it is that we need to have to thrive, to be healthy, to be whole, to be loving and kind, to be about in service to one another. So a different way of looking at wealth that I think is important is the idea of well-being. And connected with that is the aspect of work, is the aspect of the meaningful implementation of your talents, your effort, your time, your creativity toward something. We often hear, if you listen to economists or listen to any of the news broadcasts on how the economy is doing, we hear about the gross national product, right? We hear about ways of measuring the health of a society, but maybe we're measuring it in the wrong way. Ecknoth says the real wealth of a country is measured not by its gross national product, but by its grand national philosophy. Isn't that a cool way of looking at it? What if we measured our well-being, our wealth as a country, not by our gross national product, but by our grand national philosophy? He says, by the number of secure, wise, and generous people it has, and by the health of its environment. If we measured it that way, would the things we put our time and effort into be a little bit different than what they are now? I think they would be. So how do we approach this? How do we look at this differently? One of the best resources, I believe, within the field of our spiritual teaching around money and prosperity and wealth is the work done by author and philanthropist Lynn Twist. And if you're not familiar with her work and you're struggling financially or you have fears around money, I really point you to her book, The Soul of Money, Lynn Twist. In it, she identifies myths that we are living under with regard to money and with regard to wealth, and solutions to those myths I'm going to touch upon them very quickly. I can't do justice to them in a few minutes. But I think that the way she approaches the topic is really important for us because I think that we need to have a healthy attitude about this idea of wealth. And it certainly does include, as Gandhi suggested and Eknath suggests, the idea of involvement, the idea of work, the idea of effort. But you do that and you combine that with our wonderful spiritual teachings, and then you combine that with a consciousness, with a heart toward humanity, and man, money can do really great things then. Lynn Twist suggests that there are 3 myths that are driving our economy. First myth is there's not enough. Second myth is more is better. And the third myth is that's just the way it is. First myth, there's not enough. But there is enough. There is enough. Charles Fillmore talked about infinite substance. Infinite substance is the very energy of life itself. That is what we take ultimately to bring into manifestation whatever it is that we want to bring into manifestation. Gandhi talked about there being enough to fill everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. There's enough for us to have a satisfying meal, but not going overboard, and the whole of humanity going overboard to the point where we don't feel at all well. So it's a myth that there's not enough. There is enough, but it needs to be used wisely, and it needs to be used based on the level of actual need and not on greed. The second being that more is better is absolutely not true. There's no way that we can get more and more and more of something that doesn't satisfy us to begin with and feel good about it. No way. No way. More isn't necessarily better. How many of you have ever had that joyful experience of simplifying? That joyful experience of just going, wait a minute, do I really need this? Do I really have to have that? I have found myself, and I've told you this before, amused by how I can walk into a store, and now I don't walk into stores very much anymore. I do a lot of my shopping online, like a lot of people probably do. But I can see something that suddenly I think I need and want, when an hour ago I didn't even know it existed. And that's the very first, and goes back a number of years ago when I had that first aha moment. It was like, oh my gosh, I've bought into this. I didn't even know this thing existed. And now suddenly I think I have to have it. Let me roll back the clock to 61 minutes ago to that realization that more isn't better. The more we can simplify really, whether it's our consumption or our responsibilities, the more we can simplify, I think the closer we become to spirit and the more room we have for one another. The more room we have for one another. And in answer to the question, that's just the way it is, but that's a myth too, because you see, humanity has changed. For all the things that we might see that are worrisome, whether it's what we're doing to our environment, whether it's the amount of violence that we see, the war, poverty that we see, there are very real problems we have. And Gandhi and leaders and teachers like the Dalai Lama have always said that to solve those, you have to solve them spiritually. But for all the things that we can look at that are problematic and need our loving attention and need correction, as a human family, we have evolved. We are better than we were. And there's no reason for us to think that we won't continue to evolve. You and I may not see the end result of the evolution that we most long for. We may not actually see in our lifetime, a world that works for absolutely everyone with no one and nothing left behind. But that doesn't mean it's not achievable. And it doesn't mean that you and I should stop doing the very things that we know we can do right where we are in the life circumstances we find ourselves in, to inch the needle a little bit further in that direction. Lynn Twist uses a word that really fits with this idea of wealth with work, this idea of wealth as being well-being. She uses the word sufficiency. She was the first person that I ever heard that or read that word in connection with prosperity and with our teachings of demonstration and manifestation. And that word really struck me. Say it with me. Sufficiency. Sufficiency. I want to encourage you this week to keep that word alive in your mind. That whether it's you're out buying groceries or you're buying things that you need or want for your home or for work, just hold the word sufficiency. With the idea of sufficiency comes the question, do I already have enough? Do I already have enough? Sufficiency is tied to the answer to that question. And if the answer is yes, I already have enough, then I can minimize what I'm about to consume. I'm going to be very transparent here. I'm frustrated as heck with myself because I've put on a few pounds in the last few months. And I have discovered over the last number of years how much harder it is. Right? Some of you are laughing. I used to be very good at being able to get those off right away. And I'm frustrated with myself. And as I've been working on this lesson, I had an idea. Because I know that some of my snacking, anybody else a snacker? I've discovered I'm bored with something or I'm distracted. And so I get up and I grab a little treat. And those little treats aren't as forgiving anymore as they used to be. The word sufficiency applies whether Wendy's talking to Wendy about things I might buy, or whether Wendy's talking to Wendy about, do I really need that other whatever the thing is I'm going to grab to eat, right? Sufficiency, the idea of monitoring ourselves with loving kindness and awareness. Do I have enough? Am I, in this moment, am I satisfied? Can you imagine if we all lived out of that intention a bit more? How we might shift our lives and how we might shift our planet. You know, our overconsumption, and Eknath writes about this a lot in this book, our overconsumption absolutely has an impact to what we're doing to our environment. And if instead of approaching it from a place of self-deprivation, we approach these things from the place of sufficiency, and really asking ourselves, right in this moment, do I have enough? Do I need that other thing? Whether that other thing is a physical thing or an item of food, sufficiency. And so in closing, some of the broad ideas here really fall under the umbrella of living more consciously. Living more consciously with our relationship to money and work, with our understanding of wealth as well-being, and maybe looking more deeply at how we measure and value what's really important. Can we measure our life by the maximum of well-being and the minimum of consumption? The maximum of well-being and the minimum of consumption. I hope you'll explore this for yourself as I'm exploring it for me. Namaste.